Hi, everybody. Today is Tuesday, November 26th, and Colonel Wilkerson is here with us. Welcome back, Larry.
Good to be with you, Naaman.
Let's get started with what's going on right now between Israel and Hezbollah, or between Israel and Lebanon. It seems that they're reaching a ceasefire, a temporary ceasefire. And what's your take on the reasons that at the end of the day it seems, do you consider it as an achievement for the Biden administration?
I'll have to wait and see. It was orchestrated, I'm told, by Amos Hochstein and others. That doesn't give me a lot of hope. And the fact that Bibi Netanyahu's on one side of the agreement doesn't give me a lot of hope either. In fact, I'm already hearing that there are some real fights going on within the Knesset and within his cabinet. The Knesset is insisting on seeing every detail before they will approve it. He would probably go ahead and approve it anyway. He doesn't seem to pay much attention to the Knesset. He does to his cabinet because that keeps him out of jail. I think what will happen if it goes through, it's supposed to be announced tonight, joint France, Lebanon, whatever. If it goes through, I think he will have demanded and will want and will insist on and may break the agreement very quickly in order to achieve complete control. In other words, if he wants to move the people back into the north, he will move the people back into the north, even though it's been pretty much figured out analytically that he can't do that. Not even with the agreement that we're looking at right now. And I haven't seen it, so I don't know how to comport that. But so he'll do whatever he has to do to get what he wants, which is principally to get those people back into the north, those people who left their homes, if there are any of them left to move back. And if that isn't achievable, he'll break the agreement, or he'll act as if the agreement included his right to do that. And they made it to the Litani River finally, and that is a moot achievement, really, given how much combat power they put in there. So I suspect that by that progress, they have digressed majorly in terms of casualties and impact. That even though 2006 should have shown them, at least that should have shown them, they weren't ready for. So he wants this cessation, if you will, at least for a temporary period. But like I said, he'll insist on whatever he wants, and if he doesn't get it, it'll be broken immediately.
As I see, I'm checking the points in this ceasefire and in this agreement. It's not talking about sending Israeli people to the northern part of Israel. It seems that it's not part of this ceasefire, part of this
No,
agreement.
it's part of his plan.
Yeah, and
That's
here
his.
is
That's his. I think that's his real motive, because it makes it look as if, very graphically, as if Israel's not a safe place for Jews. That's true across Israel now, from Haifa all the way up to the north. But he's got to make this statement that it is categorically, or he feels like he's failed.
yeah. Here is Israeli media asking Israeli people if Israel was able to win the conflict in the southern part of Lebanon. It's 26% of these people voted for, they believe that Israel has won the conflict, and 61% that they don't feel that Israel has won the war. And it means that they've been defeated in the southern part of Lebanon.
Right.
In the eyes of Israelis, what's your take on what has happened and the motives beyond sending their people to the northern part of Israel? What is the reality of battleground, or what we've seen so far? What's your take on what has happened?
Well, it depends on what you started the war for. And I know what Bibi started the war for, to stay in power. So if you're looking at a strategic objective, it's his objective to have stayed in power, and he stayed in power. If you're looking at the number of Israelis who know the truth or intuit the truth, and you just saw it on that graph, I'm surprised it isn't higher, because they have not won. They have not even checked Hezbollah. They've killed some leaders, and they've bombed the bejesus out of Beirut and other facilities. I understand they're bombing Tyre again. And that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to destroy, that's a secondary purpose, is to destroy everything Lebanon has in the way of economic capacity so it'll never be able to compete with Israel, not in the next decade or two. The explosion in the harbor at Beirut wasn't enough to do that. They wanted to make sure they put their 10 cents worth in. That's Israel always does that every time it attacks Lebanon. So, I think the Israelis that voted for, they haven't won, are right, but they aren't looking at the right objective. The objective was to keep Bibi in power, and he succeeded in doing that. And if he has to break the ceasefire to continue to do that, he will do so. Here's what Haaretz led me to today, Nima. You'll appreciate this. They've been having this little line above the paper that they send me, the online version, that says, today is the 417th day of the war. Well, today was the 417th day. So I said, that's what I should put up above my computer. So I wrote this out, and I'm going to make it into a sign. Today is the 417th, 18th, 19th day of the most horrendous conflict since Der Führer Adolf Hitler and his counterpart in Japan, Prime Minister Hideki Tojo, brought us World War II. And I'm going to put a dash, and I was going to put it in parentheses, but I'm going to put a dash, and then bold letters I'm going to put, and Trump and Putin are going to bring us World War III. And you know what I think it was Einstein, said about World War III. If we fight World War III, if there's anyone left to fight World War IV, they'll fight it with sticks and stones. Bingo. That's where we're headed in both theaters. In the one, we're headed for nuclear war. And the other, we're headed for the utter, total condemnation of the United States for at least 2 decades to come, and pariah status for Israel and us, and the international community moving on, thank you very much, and doing what it wants to do in increasingly powerful enclaves.
Larry, do you think that the ceasefire, if happens, if they achieve some sort of ceasefire in between Israel and Lebanon, how is it going to influence the situation of Gazans and Palestinians? I'm talking about the West Bank and Gaza.
Should it last, and I'm saying what I'm saying, but I do hope it lasts. If it lasts, then it's going to make their morale plummet. And I'm sure that's probably in Bibi Netanyahu's mind too, because they have lost their only ally, if you will, who's doing anything significant other than perhaps Iran. And I still think we're waiting for the blow from Iran. Now, they have said that they will be the guarantor of Hezbollah's portion of the ceasefire. So that means when Bibi inevitably breaks the ceasefire because it's not going in the way that he wanted it to, Iran will be free to do what they want to do, and will probably do so forthwith. I suspect very quickly. They probably got the guns primed right now, as it were, and they're ready to go. If they are agreeing to this in good faith and saying we'll back Hezbollah up in terms of policing their actions in accordance with the ceasefire, and then Bibi violates it, then the next thing Bibi will get is a massive strike from Iran. So we'll just have to see.
How do you think that the Biden administration is trying to facilitate the situation in the Middle East for the Trump administration? Or maybe they're afraid of Donald Trump with his administration?
Well, given some of the people that Donald Trump has appointed to his administration and their remarks in the last 96 hours, there isn't a whole hair's breadth of difference between Joe Biden, Jake Sullivan, Tony Blinken, and Donald Trump and his crew on anything, it looks like.
Yeah. Here is Donald Trump put a director to counterterrorism. His name is Gorka. And here is what he said, Larry, in terms of what
Trump administration swinging sanctions that brought the regime practically to the brink of economic collapse, and that's when the people can take over. In the meantime, the International Court of Human Rights has put out a warrant for Bibi Netanyahu and his Minister of Defense, because Jews, How interesting that the Arab wife of George Clooney was heavily involved in that decision. The left, they're the anti-Semites. No, sorry. They're the Jew haters. Just look at the campuses across America. Look at the squad. We stand by you, Israel. Do what needs to be done, especially when it comes to the biggest sponsor of state terrorism, Iran. God bless. Tune in today. Amazing show.
Larry,
This is what I mean. This is what I mean by Trump spokespeople. Scary people.
It's unbelievable. And do you see any sort of hope in this administration so far with these people?
Well, let's just take what he just said. Now, I really don't want to do this because he's an idiot. He's a stark raving lunatic, an idiot.
But he's going to be
he's got a portfolio with Trump, but Trump's a stark raving lunatic about half the time too. But let's just parse what he said. First of all, the greatest motivator to anti-Semitism on the face of the globe is Bibi Netanyahu. I have had Jewish rabbis from California to New York to Paris tell me that. He's the greatest instigator of hatred of Jews in the world today, Bibi Netanyahu, and what he's doing in Gaza in particular. So that's the first thing he's dead wrong. The second thing he's dead wrong on is what's going to happen when he gets into position, because it's implied by what he says. What's going to happen is the confines of government and the power that it will be arrayed against him in trying to do what he wants to do will be formidable. It's going to be that way with the entire Trump administration. If it boils down to the essence of that confrontation, we're going to have a civil war. No question in my mind. I'm as sure of that as I would have been, I think, in April of 1861, when the Confederates fired on the federal fort of Fort Sumter in South Carolina. We're going to have a civil war because there are people in this administration, if they're given their way, are going to start that civil war. There's no question about it in my mind. It is going to happen. Whether it's a civil war that actually brings violence and bloodshed is another thing, but it is going to be a war. It's going to be a war between those things that our founders set up in the government to check and balance any aspect of that government. Oh God, now all three branches of which are in the hands of the Republicans, including the Supreme Court. Thank you very much. But nonetheless, there are checks and balances still existent, powerful ones in this government. He's going to run into every one of them, not least of which is going to be the people who start to abandon him when they realize how many lies he told during the campaign, for example, about Ukraine, apparently. He's lining up right now. His people are lining up. Marco Rubio, all the good guys, Pete Hegseth, they're all lining up essentially with the Biden administration on the situation in Ukraine. And that is a lie to what? A third, 2/3, I don't know, of his voters, because they voted for him because he said he would end the war in Ukraine. Well, he's already reneging on that, if there's any truth to what these people are saying, and any truth to anything Trump says anytime. But as I've said before, too, these people will all be gone. In the first year, they'll all be gone. So it remains to be seen what Trump is going to do that's any different from what he did in his first term, which was almost nothing, really. And what Biden would have done, or what Biden encumbers him with before he leaves, I have no idea. I can't predict that, because Trump will not let you predict. That's one of the scariest things about Trump. One of the things great powers have to do in the world, with very little exception, and those exceptions have to be very strategic and very carefully executed, they have to be predictable. More so than any other country on the face of the earth, a great power has to be predictable. 3 or 4 countries like that today, they have to be predictable. Look at Xi Jinping, very predictable. Look at Putin, explicitly predictable. You look at India, predictable. You know, look at Brazil, it's predictable. It had some fluctuations every now and then. Lula has the same problems he's had before. He's got this Bolsonaro type array against him, still fighting. But you have to have predictability if you are possessive of nuclear weapons and you are so-called great power. We have none. We're like a blob of mercury floating across the world scene on a 24/7 basis. with Donald Trump pushing the mercury around. I don't know what that means, Nima, except it's going to be a painful 4 years, very likely.
Do you see the risk of having a war, a major war with Iran, with these people?
I do. But that'll be subsumed, Nima, by the fact we're going to have a nuclear war. We're going to have a nuclear war with Russia. I'm sure Putin thinks that right now. That man is very, very smart. I don't care what you think about his way of getting into power or about the invasion of Ukraine. He's a very smart man. He's a very studied man. He's a very strategic actor. He just did something with this new technology, which was incredible in many respects. I understand from the experts now that the Russians have been, this was all hidden down in the bowels of our intelligence agencies, and no one told anybody. I'm wondering if anybody told Joe Biden or even the president before him or the president before him, because they've been working on this. And our intel people know that they've been working on this. They didn't know necessarily that they'd perfected it to the tune that we saw recently, but they have. This is an entirely new class of weaponry. Nima, this could negate nuclear weapons. In that sense, I'm for it. I'm for it. I'm not for the casualties it's going to produce inevitably, but it could negate the need for nuclear weapons, because you now have the impact of nuclear weapons without. It's sort of like Jimmy Carter and the neutron bomb, if you remember that. Didn't want him to have you know why we didn't want him to have the neutron bomb? We didn't want that bomb because we thought that would destroy mutually assured destruction. The very strategy we had set up in the Cold War to ensure deterrence all around. Well, this is a neutron bomb without the nuclear reactor, without the reaction. You actually have the striking power of a nuclear weapon, but with kinetic conventional munitions. This is astonishing. If you listen to Ted Postol's briefing, I think you had him on, didn't you? And you look at those videos and you understand the heat that's being. I mean, they have developed something that is incredibly futuristic, and it's right here. And he just demonstrated it. But we're going to say, oh, okay, let's have a nuclear war because we'll beat you. That seems to be what we're saying. In fact, it seems to be what we're saying from both the Biden administration and from the Trump spokespersons. So we're going to have a nuclear war. Thank you very much. World War III is coming. As Einstein said, if we have World War III, World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones if there's anyone to fight it.
I don't know if you saw the interview of Mike Walz, the next national security advisor to Donald Trump, with Fox News, in which he said that he had a meeting with Jake Sullivan, in which he's totally in line with what
eye to eye. We see eye to eye. That's what I'm talking about. I mean, you're replacing an administration that arguably, since Bill Clinton anyway, and I would say I teach this. I taught it for 20 freaking years. Everything from World War II to the present, we studied. From the Korean War to Barack Obama's very, very stupid foray into Libya. Every single one of those decision sets we studied. This is the stupidest, dumbest administration in the history of that period from 1945 to the present. And guess what? The one approaching, replacing it, looks worse. What are we going to do? I mean, how do you act when we come up in an 8-year period with this combination of characters?
After this attack on Russian soil, we had a response, as you mentioned, with this new missile, hypersonic missile, Oreshnik. They call it Oreshnik, yeah.
Wait, if you like that one, wait till you see the avant-garde. 33,000 kilometers per hour and 10 times the striking power and the weaponry it can carry. Nuclear or conventional.
But today we know that again Ukrainians are attacking Russia after that attack. And is there anybody in the Biden administration concerned about these things that are happening? Or is the Pentagon supporting them in doing this? The Biden administration? Maybe Jake Sullivan, I don't know, Anthony Blinken, who's in charge?
I got to assume they do. I think Blinken's in charge now. I really do. I've heard that from a number of sources. I'm beginning to believe it, that Biden is sort of checked out and Blinken is in charge. here's what the military people are thinking, though, and they're hoping that it holds. These storm shadows and attack them, they're pop guns. They're pop guns, 300-kilometer range. They can do some damage inside Russia. That's the important point. And they can do some damage pinpoint. But even the ones that we shot initially, 5 of them were shot down. 6th one was hit. It just went ahead and I don't know if it hit its target, but it did do some damage because it wasn't brought down. So they are pop guns, especially compared to what Putin has just demonstrated. They're small caliber stuff. But as Putin has said repeatedly, they prove his point about the duplicity and the inability of his government to trust the West, particularly Washington and London. They prove it because they know that we're helping shoot those weapons. And that's a prima facie case for him attacking a NATO country or a NATO facility in Ukraine or whatever, and taking it out, wiping it off the face of the earth. I would say he'd probably do it in Warsaw to teach those bloody Poles a lesson or whatever. I mean, that's the way he'd look at it. And that's what's coming, I think, if we keep doing this. So he's going to tit for tat, but his tats are going to be a lot bigger than our tits. Sorry about that. Language. Little impolitic language there. Although I find nothing wrong with the term tits.
Do you consider Europe being one of the targets of the Russian army, the way that the war is escalating?
Yeah, it could be, and that would be probably Putin's reason for responding like I just described. I mean, I think from what I have heard that missile absolutely devastated its target. There's nothing left of it, not even an ember burning. It's gone, disappeared, evaporated, vaporized, Okay, thank you very much. Let's do that to a major NATO facility in a major NATO country.
We talk, as you know, we talk about this new missile, hypersonic missile, on this channel and many other channels. We're talking about this with Ted Postal, other people, other experts talking about. But at the end of the day, in the mainstream media, how did you find it, the repercussions of this attack in the mainstream media? Are they really talking about it the way that it is, how important it is?
Not in the mainstream media because they don't know, Nima. They, I did an interview a little while ago, and I said this, and I mean this. I grew up during the Cold War. I mean, I was 7, 8 years old when I watched my dad run around trying to figure out, if he was going to Korea or not. He'd just gotten through with World War II, and now a few years later, he's going to go to Korea. Thank goodness he didn't have to go. But I grew up in the Cold War. I mean, the seminal years of the Cold War were my seminal years in many respects. We had incredible in-depth analysis. We had incredible people doing that analysis on both sides, both the Soviet Union and the United States. We always talked. We talked through different circuits and varying ways during the Cuban Missile Crisis. We talked throughout the far more serious, in my mind, Berlin crisis. All the way through that hot summer, we talked about the Berlin crisis because there it was existential, and the Soviets knew it was existential. The German Democratic Republic was East Germany was disappearing before our eyes. 10,000 people a day were leaving and going into West Germany. We helped them build that wall so that they would stop. That was a very serious time. But you had people thinking and people talking all during that time. I was told the other day that we haven't talked to the Russians in a serious way from diplomat to diplomat or leader to leader for 7 freaking years. That's unbelievable. And that's how low down we hold Russia on the scale of importance. And Putin knows that. And he also knows we become the most duplicitous, lying group of people he's ever run into for his own situation. And I said earlier, you may recall this, I think I said it to you. I think because of that, many months ago, he decided he was going to have to fight NATO. He was going to have to fight NATO because he decided they're too stupid to see that they're going to lose, and they're going to lose big time, and maybe the world's going to lose too. And he's prepared to do that. And he's been building his industrial base. He's been building his economy towards that base. And he's ready to fight NATO if he has to fight NATO. And it's going to be a disaster for NATO because NATO is a paper tiger, including its giant, the United States. We are a paper tiger. So we'll go nuclear. And the world is looking at so many scenarios right now whereby you can paint a reasonable, accurate path to an exchange of nuclear weapons that leads to a Holocaust that it's scary as hell. I live near Washington, D.C. I'm going to go up. So is half the rest of the country almost immediately. And then the rest of it will follow.
Right now, with what we've seen during 2024 presidential election, it seems that in the Russian administration, in the Putin administration, and in the Russian media, they had some sort of hope for the Trump administration. And as they see these people talking about how Trump would deal with Russia, and this Sebastian Gorka, he said that they have to accept our terms, and if not, we're going to send more weapons to Ukraine. When they look at the situation with the Trump administration, do you think what's going on in their mind? How are they thinking about the way that they can put an end to the conflict in Ukraine?
Well, it shows what amateur people these new people are. I mean, pure amateurs, and they shouldn't even be where they are. There's no reason, no rhyme or reason for them being where they are, but they are. So what you're looking at, I think, is people running scared, including Donald Trump. He's running scared because he let his mouth go so many times during the election, and now he's got a considerable number of people out there who are expecting him, because they cast their vote for him and put him back in office, to deliver at least partially on some of his promises. I think they went in, these people who are amateurs, rank amateurs, went in and saw Jake Sullivan and saw Tony Blinken, who, though they are just impossible people in my mind, they're the lousiest diplomats the United States has ever had, they convinced them, and they've been there for a while, and that is part of their credibility, if you will. They convinced them that this is a very, very dangerous situation for NATO and for ultimately for the United States, even though Trump has disavowed any knowledge or desire to see NATO continue to be an alliance that appertains even to the U.S. national security. And I agree with him on that. It doesn't. So here you got them getting scared to death now by Jake Sullivan and Tony Blinken. And so they're now backfilling all the things that Trump said that they now are convinced are wrong and dangerous. That's how rank amateurish they are. So we're looking at a team in office that's a bunch of cruel, brutal idiots. And we're looking at a team coming in that has the potential to be that they're crafting to be that. And so the two sides are trying to meet. And Trump is saying nothing of relevance about this. He'd better denounce these sorts of things pretty quickly, or he's not going to even have a presidency to get going. I mean, we could have the beginning of a nuclear confrontation between now and January. Easily we could have it, especially if we allow Biden to keep going the way he's going with these provocations to Putin.
I think we have to wait to see what would be the response on the Russian part now after this new attack on Russia.
But you can play it out in your mind. I mean, what are they going to do? They're going to hit something a little bit bigger than the last target they hit. Is it going to be in Ukraine? I tell you what, if I were Zelensky, I'd be out of Ukraine fairly quickly, because I think the next target they're going to hit is his palace, whatever that is, his operations center, whatever that is. And believe me, they will have 90% accurate intelligence, and that's good enough to shoot where he is. And, Zelensky should get out of Ukraine. He's the next target in many respects, him and his entire entourage. Jake Sullivan said the truest thing that anyone has said from the Biden administration the other day, when he said, it doesn't look good because Russia has got lots more soldiers than Ukraine does. And you can give them all the weaponry in the world other than nuclear weapons. And that's a scary thought. And that's not going to change. You aren't going to grow the manpower. Now
The
we're risking too that Russia goes. I mean, I wouldn't cross the Dnieper River, but you never know. Let's take all of Ukraine and present them with a fait accompli and have nothing left, and then we'll see if they think it'll be a member of NATO.
It seems for this very reason that you've mentioned, and we saw it in the talk of Jake Sullivan, they're thinking of sending NATO troops to Ukraine. The United Kingdom and France are talking about sending their troops to Ukraine to fight in Russia.
Russia would roll over the entire British ground military force with a regiment. The entire British ground military force. Its Navy barely exists, and its Air Force is in its last throes. Britain couldn't lick a Cocker Spaniel next to Big Ben. France has got a little bit more, but France is not going, mark my words, to put its soldiers in Ukraine, period. The French people will throw Macron out on his little derriere instantly. They will not put their soldiers in Ukraine. The only country that might, and this is not a country where the people will make this decision, it's the stupid government that will make the decision, is Poland. And they will get handed their rear end too, as Poland has been handed its rear end repeatedly for the last 500 years, with one or two exceptions, and they didn't last very long. So we're in a dire situation, Nima. We really are, because we have idiots in Washington, and I do mean that, idiots in Washington, and God forbid on both sides, Republicans and Democrats. At least from what we're hearing from Trump's key picks, they're as bad as the Biden administration.
Larry, do you understand where does this dominance of the United States on the European leaders come from?
It's a combination of things. I saw it throughout Powell's chairmanship of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I saw it through the 3 years I worked for him on a private basis, and then I saw it the 4+ years we worked in the Bush administration. Every time we wanted to create a European security identity, that is to say, have the Europeans stand up and do what they should, even when we started very gently with, you can have a brigade of 3,000. That brigade will not come from NATO forces. It will be independent of NATO forces. It'd be called the Euro Brigade or whatever. And things like the Balkans. Remember the Balkans? You can go take care of things like that, and NATO won't have to get involved. You will get involved as a European power on your own behalf. Deal with it the way you need to. Grow it up, so forth. No. We're scared. We're scared. We do not want to divorce ourselves from. Well, you're seeing the denouement of that right now. They are chicken shit, to put it in good private military terms. They're cowards. They do not want to push the United States away, and they think that the Biden administration is locked on Ukraine. They are right. And so they're not going to back up from it.
Larry, getting back to the conflict in the Middle East and the relationship, I think that one of the greatest problems for the Trump administration would be the situation in the Middle East. It's much more difficult right now. We know that all of these people who are at least we have some sort of division when it comes to Ukraine. But when it comes to the Middle East, all of them are in line with Israel.
Yes. And that means to me that we will wind up with the situation that I predicted when this all started. I said it's been going on for 20 years. I could have argued it's been going on since 1948 in the Nakba. And it's going on increasingly now because the United States tolerates it. It was tempered a bit before Ariel Sharon came in and took over by the United States pushing back. Now the United States is not pushing back, and what you've just insinuated is the United States is going to be in for penny, in for pound with the Netanyahu government this time. So we're going to wind up with an apartheid state. Won't be a liberal democracy, never will be a liberal democracy. It'll claim to be a Jewish state, and there'll be Jews leaving every day, and it will be constantly at war, constantly at war. It won't be just every 9 to 10 years there'll be an intifada. It'll be every other year or whatever, there'll be something. And finally, the Arabs will get fed up with it and destroy it completely. That's about the time we go totally bankrupt and are so embroiled in our own catastrophe within our own country that we basically retrench and come home. And then Israel will be shit out of luck, is the way we put it in the Army. But it'll continue for a little bit longer. Maybe, I don't know. It's still taking enormous casualties. Its IDF has been bested on every front. There are lots of people who are reconsidering the idea of it being a safe haven. They're a lot safer living in Berlin or New York or whatever than they are living in Israel. There's no question about that. So they're going to have to make some really serious decisions. And Netanyahu probably is, he'll go just like Sharon did. He'll probably die at the last minute and deprive them of the ability of keeping him in jail for a couple of years. But it'll continue. It'll continue on slow speed, and it'll be an apartheid state, never even have a hope of being a liberal democracy. It never has been really a liberal democracy. It's been a Jewish state. And now it's just standing up and saying, I'm a Jewish state, I'm a Jewish state, I'm a Jewish state. Everybody look at me, I'm a Jewish state. Well, you're going to disappear.
Here is Pam Bundy, Trump's pick for Attorney General AG, and she's talking about the protests in the United States. Here is what she said.
Democrats like Alan Dershowitz have sounded the alarm over the growing virulent strain of Jew haters in the Democrat Party. It appears their agents in the unfair press are carrying that water. It is dangerous, is it not?
Yeah, it's very dangerous, Chris. It's extremely dangerous. And, you look around, the thing that's really the most troubling to me, these students in universities in our country, whether they're here as Americans or if they're here on student visas, and they're out there saying, I support Hamas. You and I have seen that on all of these television shows. Frankly, they need to be taken out of our country, or the FBI needs to be interviewing them right away when they're saying, I support Hamas, I am Hamas. That's not saying I support all these poor Palestinians who are trapped in Gaza. That's not what they're saying. So I think their student visas need to be revoked. I think we need to reinstate President Trump's travel ban immediately. There's a lot of things that can be done to stop this. But yeah, the anti-Semitism that is rampant throughout this country now. And it's truly, truly heartbreaking to see what's happening to all of our Jewish friends in this country by really just, I think, a lot of ignorant kids and students and people who don't understand that Hamas equals terrorism, even worse, at its worst.
Yeah.
She doesn't understand the definition of anti-Semitism for sure. The greatest cause of anti-Semitism in the world today is Bibi Netanyahu. He is making more Jews uncomfortable from New York to California and around the world than any force since Adolf Hitler. He is truly making them uncomfortable because they are looking at the good life they have in New York and California and Berlin and Munich, you name the country where they're living. They're very capable people, and they're doing well in most of those places, doing as well as any other group like them in the world. And Bibi Netanyahu is jeopardizing their security and their safety and causing anti-Semitism to be on the rise. So that's her first huge mistake in saying that anti-Semitism is this. What she's saying is anti-Semitism, implying anyway, is anti-radical Zionism. That's what she's saying. And by that, she's implying she's in favor of radical Zionism and in favor of Bibi Netanyahu, who is the personification of that today. That's her first mistake. Second mistake is we did this in the Bush administration in a colossally widespread form. We robbed Americans of their ability to do what they wanted to do without government interference by the Patriot Act. As a part of that, we decided we would close the doors to all the foreigners who were coming in to go to our campuses. We almost ruined several universities whose presidents came to Washington and let us know in uncertain terms what we were doing, because these people were full bill payers. So you have to be very careful and very circumspect about how you take on these student visas and those people who come from outside. And if it's an American citizen, screw you, bitch. You ever heard of freedom of speech? You ever heard of the Constitution? It's not your privilege to grant that to American citizens. It's natural law that they have that right, declared so in the Constitution of the United States. I'm sorry, bitch. Sorry about my language, but that's the way I feel about it. You are just as bad as the people we had in the Bush administration who wanted to spy on every American citizen 24/7. You're the same way. And I don't like you at all and think you're a clear and present danger to the Constitution and the Republic.
Larry, here is what Nixon said about Israel and the policy of the United States toward Israel. I think it's of particular importance right now with Donald Trump coming to office in Washington and the way that he's going to manage the situation. We don't know what he's going to do, as you mentioned before. Let's play this clip, and I want to know what's your take on what Nixon is talking about.
My kids called him Tricky Dick.
I felt it. The fact is that American Jews support Israel, and I understood that. And the fact is that every Jewish prime minister that I have known has enlisted American Jews to bring as much pressure as possible in the political process on American presidents. That's understandable. I don't object to it. Now, a president must not go along with it on occasion, because let me explain something about what is called the Jewish lobby in this country. In the first place, Jews, understandably in the United States, because of what happened in World War II, because of the Holocaust, are going to put first priority on the survival of Israel. Now, as good Americans, as they are, they believe that America's survival and security is directly related to Israel's. In other words, their belief is that being for Israel first means that does not mean you're putting America second, because they think it goes together. An American president, however, has to approach it in a different way, in my opinion. He's got always to think first of what is best for America, and that's true whether it has to do with the Israelis or whether it has to do with the Irish or the Germans or what have you, or the Poles, etc. Usually what is best for America is also best for Israel and vice versa. But on occasions, for example, an American president must make a decision that does not in effect give the Israelis a blank check. And one example of that is a decision that I made. I decided early on in our administration that we were going to seek good relations with Egypt and others of Israel's neighbors. Many of my Israeli friends didn't like that because they wanted a special relationship with Israel and Israel only. But I have always said that Israel's interests are better served to have the United States a friend of Israel's neighbors and potential enemies than to leave a vacuum which the Soviet Union would fill. I still believe that, and I think that should be American policy today.
He has mentioned something so important, Larry, but it doesn't seem that would be the case right now for the foreign policy of the United States in the Middle East.
No. I used to use Nixon, contrary to a lot of people's views about Nixon, in my classes as the quintessential pragmatist and what I would call balanced strategic thinker. There were exceptions, like when he invaded Cambodia in 1970 without even talking to the Congress and expanded the war and doomed Phnom Penh to years and years of terror. That was a bad mistake. And I think it was made as much out of frustration and wrath over not being able to close down the Vietnam War. So what does he do? He expands it as anything else. But most of the time, this was a man who really thought strategically, analytically, and carefully about America's interests. And we just don't have that today. We simply do not have that. Go back to George Washington when he was having similar problems like we're having today with Israel in the beginning with France, who had been our compatriot, arguably had been a salvation of us against the British. You know, if it hadn't been for the French fleet off of Cornwallis's flank, we wouldn't have won at Yorktown. So he had to turn against the French when the Neutrality Act was put up. He was not going to take sides between the French and the British. He refused to do so. And he had people agitating in Washington every day against him, protesting against him, is what we would call it today. And that's why he said, don't ever be too close to any single nation. Well, that's really a good principle of international relations. Never sell your soul to any nation in the world. We have sold our soul to Israel. And apparently both administrations now, one in power and one coming in, are going to continue that sale. And that's deadly. That's deadly. As Nixon just said, it's not in American interest.
How, Larry, right now, do you think that Netanyahu with this ceasefire, is he going? He one of the things that he mentioned in his talk, he talked about this ceasefire just minutes ago before we come to this live. He said that we need some sort of rest for our soldiers, and I'm afraid what I'm thinking of, Larry. I'm afraid of that he's gonna withdraw the soldiers from Lebanon and send them to Gaza. This is the problem.
I don't think that would constitute rest. Nima, I'm hearing from very reputable sources, and I'm reading it between the lines in Haaretz's articles, which I really go over today now, every day. They've got a third of the 300,000 reservists that they called up for Gaza on October the 8th, I guess, or shortly thereafter, who are not showing up for duty, saying they aren't going to show up for duty, or reneging on their contracts, whatever they might be. I don't know how they do their contracts for their reserve components, but that's a third of the initial call-up force that is not going to come back to battle. So I think it's a genuine seeking for respite, because the IDF is almost broken and he needs that respite. So saying that, I've almost convinced myself because of that maybe this ceasefire is more than just tactical. It might be operational, at least. That is to say, he will violate everything he can, but he won't take it to the point where he nullifies the ceasefire. Now, I may be wrong. He may, it's Netanyahu after all. When he doesn't get what he wants, he's like a little baby in a sandbox, yeah, shaking his rattle at the world. So I don't know, but yes, the IDF is extremely battle weary.
Yeah. Let's just to wrap up this session, Larry. We have two conflicts right now, two major conflicts, one in Ukraine and the other one in the Middle East. Do you think the final goal of this administration, the Biden administration, would be hand over these two conflicts in some sort of stability, or they want to escalate both of them? As you mentioned, maybe Netanyahu is planning for a major, because he said in this, again, in his talk for this ceasefire, he said his main focus right now is on Iran. And
yes, and
it seems that he's looking for some sort of escalation.
And if he thinks, and this may have happened already, he may have already talked to Donald Trump, and they may have agreed on this, that Trump is going to join him in the ultimate battle. And look at what you've just described, Nima. You put it together succinctly. We have Ukraine that could lead to nuclear war. We have Gaza that could lead to a much wider war, because when you go to war with Iran, it's going to be much wider. And they're feeding one another. Just like any war that we call a world war, or in the past, it was a more or less regional conflagration in a region that was the only known part of the world. That's what happens. You get all these forces going, and they coalesce in a moment that you don't even recognize is coming. And then suddenly you have, as you did in 1914, you have a colossally destructive war. You can see a lot of the fabric that was existent in 1914 in the world today, and some new wrinkles like this technology that the Russians just demonstrated. And you can see how it all coalesces. You can see Ukraine getting out of hand, for example, and Russia actually having to do something serious, and then NATO contemplating a more serious response. And then all of a sudden, Russia makes a decision, well, we can really get these bastards in the Middle East. So let's talk to Xi and let's get some real support going for Iran. We'll have a major front there that will keep the bastards in Washington busy for the next decade. And all of a sudden, it all coalesces, and you've got a global war, and you're using nuclear weapons in it. I think, in the run up to that too, the Iranians are smart enough. People like Zarif are smart enough to sense what's happening, and they would go whole hog fast as they could for a nuclear weapon because they don't want to be the last one out, as it were, in a nuclear war. We're looking at a cataclysm building right now.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Larry, for being with us today. Great
Sure.
pleasure, as always.
Not very happy thinking prior to Thanksgiving.
Just a minute.